Alexander Monroe, a cold-hearted CEO who doesn't believe in love, is forced to hire fake wife named Eleanor Monroe to appease his mother as his true lover. Before we start the story, leave a comment letting us know where you're watching from and enjoy the story as we are about to delve in depth on how CEO introduced fake wife to his mother. In the gleaming towers of corporate power, where every decision is calculated and every emotion kept under lock and key, Alexander Hale ruled with an iron fist and a frozen heart. Known for his ruthless business tactics and a demeanor that could chill the warmest room, Alexander's life was a series of transactions and boardroom battles. But behind the polished veneer and relentless ambition lay a personal truth he refused to confront. Love was nothing more than a liability. That is until his formidable mother, Margaret Hale, whose opinions were as unyielding as her tradition-bound values, demanded a wife to stand by her son's side. The idea was scandalous to Alexander. Love, for him, had always been an indulgence he could ill afford. Yet, family honor loomed large over his empire, and he found himself cornered into a situation that threatened to upend his meticulously ordered life. Enter Eleanor Monroe, a woman whose beauty radiated warmth like a sunrise after a long, frigid night. With soft eyes that seemed to hold untold stories and a gentle smile that defied the cynical world around her, Eleanor was nothing like the calculated partners Alexander had encountered before. Hired initially as a mere facade, a pawn in his mother's quest for an ideal family image, she quickly began to unravel the layers of Alexander's well-guarded heart. In a twist of fate and deception, what began as a contractual arrangement slowly transformed into something far more complex. As the two navigated public appearances, tense family gatherings, and late-night conversations that revealed hidden scars, the boundaries between pretense and reality began to blur. Each stolen glance, every unexpected laugh, and the shared moments of vulnerability chipped away at the icy walls Alexander had built around himself. Unbeknownst to him, the very act of satisfying his mother's demands would ignite a spark that threatened to set his world ablaze, challenging everything he believed about love, duty, and the sacrifices required for both. In a battle between legacy and the possibility of happiness, the stage was set for a transformation that no one, least of all Alexander, could have predicted. Alexander Hale's world was built on numbers, contracts, and unyielding power. In the high-rise glass towers of Hale Industries, every decision was measured in profit margins and calculated risks. At 35, Alexander had earned a reputation as a cold-hearted CEO, a man who believed emotions were liabilities in the boardroom. His heart, he felt, was best kept locked away. Each morning, Alexander would rise before dawn in his immaculate penthouse. The city below stirred to life as he reviewed reports, planned acquisitions, and met with ruthless executives. Yet, for all his successes, there was a part of him he refused to acknowledge, a vulnerability born from childhood disappointments and heartbreaks. Love, to him, was an unnecessary distraction. That all changed when his mother, Margaret Hale, a stern woman with traditional values, made her unyielding demand. Margaret had always been the guardian of family honor and legacy. To her, a proper wife was a sign of respectability, a necessary complement to her son's public image. She believed that behind every great man stood a supportive, charming partner, and she was determined to see her son fulfill that role. Alexander despised the idea. In board meetings and over late-night drinks, he had laughed at the notion that love could ever improve his hard-edged approach to life. Yet the voice of his mother, both authoritative and affectionate, began to echo in his mind. He knew that ignoring her wishes could spark family discord and damage the legacy he'd fought so hard to build. The pressure mounted over several weeks. Every time Alexander returned home, his mother's gaze would linger on him with an unspoken question. "When will you have a wife?" Family dinners grew tense, and every casual conversation was tainted by hints of scandal if he failed to produce the ideal partner. His friends and trusted aides even whispered their concerns. Alexander's reputation was at stake, and not just in the business world. One evening, after a particularly grueling day, Alexander found himself alone in his study. The city lights flickered below like scattered stars, but inside, his mind was a storm of conflicting emotions. "I have built my empire on logic, on reason," he murmured to himself. "But is it worth sacrificing my freedom for a mere facade?" The answer, however, was not to be found in solitude. Margaret's voice, gentle yet commanding, echoed in his memory. "A man of your standing should have someone by his side, someone who brings grace and warmth to your life," she would say. In a twist of fate, Alexander realized that to preserve the honor of his family and protect his empire from scandal, he might have no choice but to act against his own nature. At a charity event, one of many lavish functions Alexander attended, the plan took shape. His mother's insistence had grown impossible to ignore, and his trusted advisors had suggested a solution: a fake wife. Alexander was skeptical, but his options were narrowing. That night, in the grand ballroom filled with glittering lights and murmuring guests, fate stepped in. Eleanor Monroe entered quietly, as if she were not expecting to be the center of attention. Unlike the usual high society debutantes with practiced smiles and rehearsed pleasantries, Eleanor carried an unassuming grace. Her warm brown eyes and soft smile hinted at a gentle strength, and her beauty was natural, not the polished veneer of someone trained solely for public appearances. When Alexander first laid eyes on her, he felt a momentary disquiet. Could this woman, so genuine, so unforced, be the perfect counterbalance to his own calculated life? Despite himself, he found his cynicism warring with a spark of intrigue. The advisors quickly introduced them, and in that brief exchange, a fragile alliance was formed. Eleanor was to play the role of his wife, if only temporarily, to satisfy his mother's demands. Yet even as the arrangement was laid out in careful, businesslike terms, Eleanor's warm presence began to seep into Alexander's guarded heart. Her simple, sincere manner was unlike anything he had encountered in his cold world of transactions and power plays. The following days were filled with rehearsed smiles, practiced introductions, and public appearances that felt as artificial as they were necessary. Each event, from charity galas to family luncheons, was a stage where Alexander and Eleanor performed their roles. To the outside world, they appeared as the perfect couple, composed, elegant, and full of quiet affection.
Inside, however, both wrestled with their inner truths. Alexander maintained his icy reserve, determined not to let his guard down even for a woman who was quickly winning his admiration. Eleanor, for her part, played the part with impeccable grace. Yet she too was curious about the man behind the stern facade. In whispered conversations away from prying eyes, she gently probed for hints of his past and the experiences that had shaped him. At one particularly tense family dinner, Margaret's eyes sparkled with satisfaction as she observed the couple interacting. "You see," she would later say, in a tone laced with both pride and a touch of mischief, "a wife brings balance to a man's life." Alexander's stomach churned at her words, reminders of obligations he had long resisted. During a quiet moment in a secluded corner of the mansion, Eleanor spoke softly. "I know this isn't real for you, Alexander, but sometimes even a role can teach us something about who we are." Her words lingered in the silence between them, a subtle challenge to his ironclad beliefs. As weeks turned into months, the lines between act and reality began to blur. The more Alexander encountered Eleanor's genuine warmth and quiet strength, the more he found himself questioning the walls he had built around his heart. Their interactions, initially stiff and purely businesslike, grew filled with moments of unexpected laughter, shared glances, and even debates that revealed a surprising compatibility of intellect and wit. One evening, after a particularly exhausting day at work, Alexander found himself alone with Eleanor in his study. The conversation drifted from the usual formalities to personal stories, the kind that rarely found their way into the polished script of his public life. Eleanor recounted childhood memories, humble beginnings, and dreams that extended far beyond the confines of society's expectations. Alexander listened, transfixed by the simplicity and authenticity of her narrative. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to be vulnerable. "I have always believed that love is a distraction," he confessed quietly. "But perhaps I have been wrong." Eleanor's response was tender and filled with a quiet conviction. "Sometimes, the very things we fear can become our greatest strengths." That night, as the city outside continued its relentless bustle, Alexander's thoughts danced between duty and desire. The fake wife arrangement, a plan born of necessity, was slowly revealing a deeper, more complicated truth. Sometimes the roles we play have a way of becoming real. As the months passed, Alexander and Eleanor's public life took on a rhythm of its own. Every charity event, board meeting, and formal dinner became a carefully choreographed performance. To the outside world, they were the perfect couple, an elegant pair whose chemistry was undeniable. Yet behind the sparkling smiles and rehearsed pleasantries, both struggled with the reality of their arrangement. At a gala held in a grand, historic ballroom, the couple was introduced as the new faces of corporate philanthropy. The room buzzed with admiration as Margaret Hale, with an air of satisfaction, extolled the virtues of unity and family tradition. Alexander stood stiffly at her side, his practiced smile betraying nothing, while Eleanor, ever graceful, exchanged polite greetings with influential guests. Despite his outward composure, Alexander felt a growing internal conflict. Every congratulatory remark and every admiring glance from the crowd made him painfully aware of the performance he was forced to give. He could not shake the thought that his carefully guarded heart was slowly, almost imperceptibly, beginning to thaw in the presence of Eleanor's kindness. Yet he maintained his icy demeanor, unwilling to risk the vulnerability that true emotion might bring. Across the room, Eleanor watched him with a mix of compassion and curiosity. She sensed the heavy armor around him, a fortress built not just for self-protection, but to keep love at bay. And as she mingled with guests, her eyes often returned to Alexander, silently urging him to let go of the burdens that held him back. Not all moments were confined to the rigid scripts of their public appearances. In the quieter corners of their hectic lives, unscripted interactions began to reveal hints of authenticity. One rainy evening, after a particularly demanding day at the office, Alexander found himself in the solitude of his study. The sound of rain tapping against the window was oddly soothing, a gentle reminder of nature's persistence despite man-made barriers. Eleanor had joined him unexpectedly, her presence soft and reassuring. She carried with her an air of calm that contrasted sharply with the relentless pace of his daily routines. As they sat together, a silence enveloped them, a silence filled not with discomfort, but with a tentative understanding. "I've always believed that emotions are a weakness," Alexander confessed, his voice low and measured. "They cloud judgment, and in business, clarity is everything." Eleanor regarded him with gentle eyes. "Sometimes," she replied quietly, "it is the very emotions we fear that give us the strength to see the truth. It's in our vulnerability that we truly connect." Her words, simple yet profound, lingered in the dim light of the study. Alexander's mind raced with conflicting thoughts. Was it possible that beneath his years of self-imposed isolation, there lay the capacity for genuine connection? He couldn't deny the spark that Eleanor had ignited, a spark that promised a world beyond profit margins and power plays. Even as personal revelations began to stir, a shadow loomed over Alexander's empire. Rumors of a corporate scandal started to ripple through the industry. Whispers of insider trading and questionable business deals that threatened to tarnish the reputation he had fought so fiercely to protect. At first, Alexander dismissed the rumors as baseless gossip. After all, his record was unblemished, his strategies meticulously planned. However, as investigative journalists and rival companies began to scrutinize his operations, the pressure mounted. Board meetings turned tense, and late-night phone calls became a routine as Alexander tried to quell the growing storm. Amid this professional crisis, Eleanor's steady presence became a beacon of calm. Though her role was originally to be merely decorative, she proved herself indispensable with her keen insight and unwavering support. In quiet moments, when the weight of the scandal pressed down on him, Alexander found himself seeking her counsel. Together, they pored over reports, strategized responses, and worked to salvage the remnants of a legacy in danger of crumbling. Yet the crisis was not confined to boardrooms and press conferences. At home, the tension seeped into every corner of his life. Margaret Hale, ever the vigilant matriarch, began to worry that the scandal might undo all of her carefully laid plans. Her insistence on a proper family image suddenly carried an additional urgency, a desperate need to hold onto control in an increasingly uncertain world. As the crisis deepened, so too did the bond between Alexander and Eleanor. It was during one such challenging night that the true depth of their connection began to reveal itself. After a long day of crisis management, Alexander found himself alone in his private library, the walls lined with books and mementos of past triumphs. The familiar scent of leather and paper offered a temporary escape from the chaos of the corporate world. Eleanor joined him, her footsteps quiet on the plush carpet. In the warm glow of a solitary lamp, the two shared an intimate conversation that diverged from their usual rehearsed dialogues. The subject turned to personal histories, stories of childhood dreams, personal losses, and the quiet moments that shaped who they were. "I was always told that love was dangerous," Alexander admitted, his voice softer than he had ever allowed himself to be. "It distracts, it complicates. I built walls around my heart to protect myself from that pain." Eleanor reached out, her hand resting gently on his. "And yet, sometimes those very walls can be your undoing," she murmured. "They keep you safe, but they also keep you from feeling the warmth that life has to offer." In that moment, the lines between their roles as employer and employee, or as a fake couple and something more, began to blur irreversibly. Alexander realized that the woman beside him was no longer just a solution to his mother's demands or a temporary distraction. Eleanor had become a mirror, reflecting back the parts of him he had long suppressed. Her presence was a gentle challenge to his convictions, a call to embrace the possibility of love despite its risks. The corporate scandal, like an unruly storm, began to unravel the meticulously maintained facade of Alexander's life. As the media spotlight intensified, cracks in the empire became increasingly visible. Competitors and former allies whispered about misdeeds, and even Alexander's most trusted executives began to voice their concerns. Every public appearance, every statement, was now under a microscope, and the pressure to maintain control grew insurmountable. For Alexander, the scandal was not just a professional crisis. It was a personal reckoning. The facade of the cold, unyielding CEO was crumbling, revealing a man who was perhaps more human than he had ever allowed himself to admit. In the midst of this chaos, Eleanor's unwavering support provided a sanctuary, a space where he could confront his vulnerabilities without fear of judgment. At one pivotal moment, during a late-night strategy session that extended well into the early hours, Alexander finally let his guard down. Sitting across from Eleanor in the quiet confines of his office, he spoke of his deepest fears, the fear of failure, of losing everything he had built, and of opening himself up to a love that might only lead to further heartache. Eleanor listened intently, her eyes filled with empathy. "It's okay to be afraid, Alexander," she said softly. "But sometimes in facing those fears, we find the courage to rebuild. Not just our empires, but ourselves." Her words resonated deeply, sparking a slow, steady change within him. That night marked a turning point. The partnership they had once forged out of necessity was evolving into something real. Alexander began to see Eleanor not merely as a prop to appease his mother, but as a partner in the truest sense. Someone who could help him navigate both the turmoil of his professional life and the uncharted territory of his emotions. The boardroom, once a domain of crisp suits and calculated deals, now resembled a battleground. Whispers of the ongoing scandal had spread like wildfire, and even Alexander's closest executives were questioning their loyalties. The polished veneer of Hale Industries was beginning to crack, and the consequences could be severe. One cold morning, as Alexander prepared for yet another high-stakes meeting, he found himself pausing before entering the conference room. His reflection in the mirror, stark, determined, and haunted by doubt, reminded him of how much his world had changed in recent months. The once impenetrable fortress of his confidence now showed signs of vulnerability, partly due to the relentless scrutiny and partly because of Eleanor's unexpected influence. Inside the boardroom, heated discussions erupted over strategy and damage control. Alexander's voice, usually commanding and resolute, wavered as he addressed the doubts of his senior advisors. We must stand united, he insisted, though his eyes betrayed a flicker of uncertainty. It was in these moments, amid the corporate chaos, that Eleanor's earlier words echoed in his mind. It's in our vulnerability that we truly connect. After the meeting, as murmurs continued to circulate, Eleanor sought him out in the quiet of his office. "I saw the way they looked at you today," she said softly, her tone laced with concern. "You are not alone in this fight, Alexander. Even the strongest walls can fall if we do not tend to them." Her reassurance, simple and sincere, acted as a salve for the wounds inflicted by the day's battles. In the dim light of his office, with city sounds muffled by nightfall, Alexander allowed himself a moment of raw honesty. "I fear that everything I've built is coming apart," he admitted, voice low and trembling with a mixture of fear and hope. "And yet, your presence makes me believe I can rebuild." In the weeks that followed, the crisis continued to escalate. Rumors of mismanaged funds and questionable deals grew louder, and the media's relentless pursuit of the truth placed Alexander under constant pressure. It was during one such tumultuous evening that the walls of his carefully constructed past began to crumble, revealing the scars hidden deep within. Late one night, after a particularly grueling day of crisis management, Alexander found himself alone in the family library, a room filled with relics of both triumph and tragedy. As he rifled through old files and faded photographs, memories of a once hopeful youth emerged. A time when dreams had not yet been buried under the weight of ambition and loss. In these quiet moments, the cold logic of the CEO faded into the background, replaced by emotions that had long been suppressed. Eleanor, who had grown increasingly perceptive of Alexander's internal battles, joined him quietly. Her presence, comforting and unobtrusive, encouraged him to speak the words he had kept hidden. "I wasn't always like this," Alexander began, his voice husky with emotion. "There was a time when I believed in the power of hope and dreams. But life taught me that love and ambition don't always mix." Eleanor listened with a compassionate intensity, her eyes reflecting a deep understanding of the pain behind his words. Sometimes, she replied gently, "It's the moments of pain that shape us into who we are meant to be. They remind us that even in darkness, there is a light waiting to shine through." That night, amidst the dusty pages of a forgotten journal and the soft hum of the city beyond the library windows, Alexander revealed the secret of a past love, a love that had been sacrificed on the altar of ambition and family expectations. It was a confession that shattered the remaining barriers of his guarded heart, allowing Eleanor to see the man beneath the CEO persona. In sharing his pain, Alexander unknowingly opened the door to healing, a process that would not be immediate, but essential for the man he was becoming. The personal revelations were paralleled by a mounting external pressure. With every passing day, the corporate scandal intensified. Alexander's competitors, sensing an opportunity, began to target his empire with aggressive maneuvers, and the public's trust wavered dangerously. The once impenetrable image of Hale Industries was now stained with suspicion and uncertainty. During a critical press conference, Alexander was forced to confront the reality of his situation. Cameras flashed, and microphones thrust him into the spotlight, each question probing his every move. His prepared answers, honed over years of public speaking, faltered under the weight of honest introspection. The raw emotion in his eyes was unmistakable, a window into the turmoil that lay beneath. In the midst of the chaos, Eleanor stood at his side, a silent pillar of support. Her presence did more than comfort him. It signaled a commitment that went beyond the original facade. "I trust you," she whispered during a brief moment away from the glaring lights and probing reporters. "Not just as the man who runs a company, but as someone who has the courage to be true to himself." That simple declaration stirred something deep within Alexander. For years, he had believed that strength lay in unwavering control and emotional detachment. Now, as he felt the stirrings of genuine connection, the realization dawned on him that true strength might lie in embracing one's emotions, even if it meant risking heartache and vulnerability. In the days following the press conference, Alexander's internal struggle grew more intense. Every decision, every public statement was now infused with a subtle blend of caution and hope. The man who once scoffed at the idea of love found himself questioning the very principles that had guided him for so long. And with every shared glance and quiet conversation with Eleanor, he began to understand that love was not a liability, but a force capable of rebuilding even the most fragile foundations. The turning point came unexpectedly during a family gathering at the Hale estate, a grand, historic mansion that had witnessed generations of Hale triumphs and tragedies. The air was thick with anticipation and the undercurrent of scandal, as relatives and associates alike gathered to discuss the future of the empire. Margaret Hale, ever the embodiment of tradition and stern expectations, had arranged the event as an opportunity to reaffirm the family's unity and strength. As the evening unfolded, tensions simmered beneath the surface. Whispers of the corporate scandal mingled with the clinking of crystal glasses and the soft murmur of polite conversation. In a moment that seemed to crystallize the weight of the past and the uncertainty of the future, Margaret called Alexander and Eleanor aside for a private conversation. In a richly paneled room adorned with portraits of Hale ancestors, the matriarch's gaze was as piercing as ever. "Alexander," she began, her voice both gentle and unyielding, "our family's honor depends on more than just business success. It depends on the strength of our bonds, our ability to stand together in the face of adversity." Her eyes shifted to Eleanor, and for the first time, the sternness softened into a look of genuine curiosity. "You've become more than a mere facade," Margaret continued. "Your presence, Eleanor, has stirred something in my son, a part of him that I had long feared was lost. But I must ask, is it possible that what began as a mere arrangement has grown into something real?" The question hung in the air, heavy with expectation and unspoken emotion. Alexander, who had long guarded his feelings, found himself at a crossroads. The confrontation with his mother forced him to acknowledge the depth of his internal transformation. With a deep breath, he met her gaze. "I cannot deny that my life has changed," he said, his voice steady but soft. "Eleanor has not only helped me face the challenges of this crisis, but has also helped me rediscover parts of myself I thought were forever buried." Margaret's expression, a mixture of pride and relief, was the only answer needed. In that pivotal moment, the facade that had once defined Alexander's existence began to dissolve. The confrontation marked a decisive shift, one where personal vulnerability was no longer a weakness, but a testament to growth and authenticity. In the wake of that private confrontation, the atmosphere at the estate transformed. The family's discussions, once steeped in cautious optimism, now took on a tone of genuine hope. The crisis that had once threatened to tear the empire apart was met with a newfound resilience. A resilience forged in the crucible of personal revelation and shared struggle. As the days turned into weeks, Alexander's approach to the ongoing scandal shifted noticeably. No longer did he rely solely on cold, calculated strategies. Instead, he began to integrate the lessons he had learned from Eleanor, the value of empathy, the strength found in vulnerability, and the transformative power of genuine connection. In board meetings and public appearances alike, his demeanor softened ever so slightly, revealing glimpses of the man who was learning to embrace both duty and desire. Late one evening, in the quiet solitude of his private study, Alexander sat down to make a decision that would alter the course of his life. With the weight of the scandal and the personal revelations bearing down on him, he knew that a clear, honest choice was necessary. The decision was not just about how to salvage his business reputation. It was about accepting the new path that his heart had begun to carve. In the stillness of that moment, as he penned a final statement addressing both the corporate crisis and the changes in his own life, Alexander realized that the line between pretense and truth had finally blurred beyond repair. The woman who had once been hired as a fake wife had become the catalyst for his rebirth. It was time to embrace the possibility of love, not as a calculated risk, but as a genuine, transformative force. He folded the paper with a sense of calm determination, knowing that the future was uncertain but hopeful. Alexander was ready to step beyond the confines of his old self and into a life where authenticity and affection could coexist with ambition. And in that decision, he found a quiet certainty that the path ahead, though fraught with challenges, held the promise of true fulfillment. The storm of scandal that had once threatened to dismantle Hale Industries now reached its climax. Boardrooms, once filled with hushed conversations and calculated strategies, pulsed with tension and urgency. Every email, every statement to the press, carried the weight of a legacy on the brink of collapse. For Alexander, the pressure was almost unbearable. Late one evening, in the confines of his office, Alexander sat before a sprawling window, watching the city lights flicker like distant beacons of hope. The crisis had not only eroded the public's trust, but had also unleashed personal demons he had fought for decades. In that quiet solitude, the weight of every decision, every sacrifice, and every loss pressed upon him. Eleanor appeared at his side, her gentle presence a stark contrast to the storm raging outside. "Alexander," she said softly, "I know it feels like everything is falling apart, but sometimes in the midst of chaos, we discover what truly matters." Her words, tender and resolute, stirred a long-forgotten spark within him. It was in that fragile moment, where vulnerability met determination, that Alexander realized the crisis was not solely about salvaging his empire. It was about reclaiming the parts of himself that had been buried beneath layers of ambition and self-protection. With Eleanor's unwavering support, he resolved to face the breaking point head-on, determined to rebuild not just his company, but his very identity. In the days that followed, Alexander embarked on a grueling journey of transparency and accountability. With Eleanor by his side, he initiated a series of public apologies, internal reforms, and strategic overhauls aimed at restoring confidence in Hale Industries. Each step was a testament to his newfound commitment, not only to his business, but to the values he had once long ago dismissed as impractical. Press conferences that once would have seen him deflect and retreat now became platforms for honest dialogue. He spoke of his mistakes, of the lessons learned, and of the courage it took to embrace vulnerability. In doing so, he began to win back the trust of skeptical investors, loyal employees, and even his most staunch critics. During one pivotal press conference, as cameras captured every raw moment, Alexander declared, "I have come to understand that leadership is not about being unyielding or emotionless. It is about facing our imperfections, learning from them, and using them to build a future that is stronger, fairer, and more compassionate." His words resonated deeply, marking a turning point in both his personal journey and the company's recovery. Eleanor's presence was the steady heartbeat in these turbulent times. Often seen side by side with Alexander at reform meetings and community events, she became a symbol of hope and resilience, a living reminder that even the most calculated of hearts could learn to embrace love. Their public partnership, once a facade contrived to satisfy tradition, had transformed into a beacon of genuine transformation and unity. As the corporate world began to stabilize, a quieter but equally profound drama unfolded within the Hale family. Margaret Hale, whose unyielding expectations had once seemed an insurmountable barrier, found herself confronting the reality of change. The long-held belief that a perfect facade was the measure of success gradually gave way to the understanding that authenticity and growth were far more valuable. Late one afternoon, as the golden light of dusk filtered through the grand drawing room of the Hale estate, Margaret sat with Alexander and Eleanor. The air was filled with a mix of solemn reflection and cautious optimism. "I have spent my life believing that appearances were everything," she admitted, her voice tinged with a rare vulnerability. "But witnessing the changes in you, my son, and the grace with which Eleanor has helped you rediscover yourself, I realized that the truest strength comes from facing our faults and learning from them. Alexander reached out to take his mother's hand, a gesture that bridged years of misunderstanding and unspoken pain. "Mother, I never imagined that the very challenges I feared would be my undoing would instead become the catalyst for my transformation," he said quietly. "Thank you for pushing me to be more than just the sum of my successes." Eleanor, ever the gentle mediator, added, "Sometimes the path to healing is paved with honesty, forgiveness, and a willingness to embrace change. Our past may have its scars, but it does not have to define our future." In that moment, the Hale family found a new sense of unity, a reconciliation that promised to heal old wounds and lay the foundation for a legacy built on both strength and compassion. With the immediate crises behind them, Alexander and Eleanor turned their focus to the future. The company, once a symbol of cold ambition, began to reinvent itself with a renewed emphasis on ethical leadership, community engagement, and sustainable practices. Hale Industries transformed into a model of corporate responsibility, a living proof that even the most troubled past could give rise to a brighter, more inclusive future. Amid these sweeping changes, the personal relationship between Alexander and Eleanor blossomed into something real and irrevocable. No longer bound by the original contract or the expectations of a bygone era, their love emerged organically, a slow-burning flame that illuminated even the darkest corners of their lives. One crisp autumn day, as the leaves turned a vibrant shade of gold, Alexander and Eleanor strolled together through the grounds of the Hale estate. The air was filled with the scent of change and possibility. "I never believed that I could be more than the man I was taught to be," Alexander confessed, his eyes reflecting the clarity of his new outlook. "But with you, I have learned that love is not a weakness. It is the very force that can rebuild us from the inside out." Eleanor smiled, her heart full. It is never too late to change, to heal, and to embrace the life that awaits us. Every ending is but the start of a new beginning. Their words, simple yet profound, resonated with the promise of tomorrow, a future where the past mistakes gave way to wisdom and compassion. The final chapter of their journey arrived quietly. Its impact was monumental. The Hale family, the employees of Hale Industries, and the wider community had all borne witness to a transformation that transcended boardroom battles and media scandals. Alexander and Eleanor had shown that even the most impenetrable defenses could crumble in the face of genuine connection, and that vulnerability was not a flaw, but a strength. In a grand ceremony that celebrated both corporate renewal and personal triumph, Alexander and Eleanor stood before a gathering of friends, family, and loyal colleagues. The event, set against a backdrop of hope and unity, symbolized the rebirth of not only a company, but also a man and a woman who had dared to embrace the full spectrum of human emotion. As Margaret Hale looked on, pride and tenderness mingled in her eyes. "Today, we witness not just the revival of Hale Industries, but the birth of a legacy defined by integrity, compassion, and love," she proclaimed. The applause that followed was not merely for the success of a business, but for the courage it took to admit mistakes, to grow, and to create something truly beautiful from the ashes of the past. After the ceremony, in the quiet of the twilight, Alexander and Eleanor found themselves together on the estate's balcony. The soft hum of celebration faded into a gentle silence. "I used to think that love was an unnecessary risk," Alexander murmured, his voice laden with emotion. "Now I know that it is the very risk that makes life worth living." Eleanor's hand found his, their fingers intertwining as naturally as if they had always belonged together. "The journey ahead is uncertain, but I believe that as long as we face it together, with honesty, courage, and love, we can overcome anything." In that final moment, under a sky painted with the hues of a new dawn, Alexander and Eleanor embraced a future unburdened by the past, a future where every challenge was met with the strength of their bond, and every day was a promise of hope renewed. Don't miss out on the inspiring stories that shape our history. Subscribe to Stories of Legends today and be the first to receive exclusive updates, behind-the-scenes insights, and powerful narratives that ignite hope and transform lives. Subscribe now and start your legendary journey.